Okay, let's go. All right, so that's another type of another plot of the air quality as a function of time in Grafton, New Hampshire. This is where Dartmouth is. Right? So you can clearly see that based on just by looking, eyeballing this picture, and you will easily see that for the place of Grafton, most of the points are in the green band, which means the air quality is much better in Grafton rather than New York City. Right? Of course, that's right because New York City has several million people, while Grafton is basically in the middle of nowhere, right? Okay, so the other examples will be like this. This is the earthquake data from USGS, and this is also a nice type of visualization, and you will learn how to make plots like this after this course. Right? So this is a map, first of all. So you need to create a map, and each circle down there says that's a location of earthquake where it happens, right? And the size of the circle indicates the magnitude, while the color indicates age, right? So red ones are brand new, and white ones are month older, and gray ones are really older, right? So that's a nice way of putting data together, and you can see what's the distribution of the earthquakes, and you can kind of see that's related to the plate tectonics, right? All right, so if we go to more results, and there are lots of misleading data analysis. For example, the temperature change is always an interesting topic, right? For example, if you look at the temperature changes between 1998 to 2012, right? That's like one solar cycle. And you will see that if you look at the temperature changes down there, and the conclusion here will be relatively straightforward, easy, is that you can see there is a decrease in the temperature, right? Global temperature changes. Right, so get the conclusion that temperature drops as a function of time. But is that really true? Right? So if we look at longer time scale, if you're starting from 1980 instead of 898, right, and we redo the analysis and kind of find the trend that the temperature actually increases by about zero point 0.4 degrees in Celsius. And this is because the atmosphere varies at a much longer time scale compared to 12 years, right? So you need a longer time scale, say 20, 30, even more than that years to get a sense of what the long-term variation is, right? So in fact, if you go to a much longer time from like 100 years time scale, you can clearly see this increasing trend in the temperature, global temperature change. Right? So this is also an indication that when you look at data, and sometimes what you see is not what you get, right? So data science does not serve alone, and you have to combine it with the right physics or the knowledge of how the system works. And this is an example that because the global atmosphere as a climate system, it changes much, much slower than just 10 years, right? Right. So this will be another type of visualization showing you that the variation of the temperature. So the horizontal axis is months, while the vertical axis, that's the temperature anomaly, which is the temperature deviation from a reference period. And you can kind of see that compared to a average temperature, you have higher and positive anomaly in the summer and negative anomaly in the winter. But in general, the temperature variation, there's a general trend from 1880 to 2018 within about 200 years, or not, maybe 150 years. And you can see that the temperature becomes anomaly is increasing in the summer and also increasing, decreasing slightly in the winter as well. Right? So this figure can be easily generated by Python. So if you took the course after this semester, you should be able to generate a figure like this, right? But this is not the best figure. Right? So there's another type of data analysis is that it's the temperature anomalies over land and the ocean, right? So you can see we have different markers here. So the orange markers indicating the temperature anomaly of the air, while the blue one that's indicating the temperature anomaly of the water surface, right? And those thick lines in the middle, the solid line in the middle, they are smoothing, which means they are averaged over a given period. And now by doing this, and we are getting rid of these jiggering motion, so there's no motion like this, but you can see kind of clearly see a trend of increasing temperature anomaly over the past 50 years, right? So to getting from those very noisy data to this nice trend, and that's also called detrending, or the data time series analysis. And that's also a main part of the data analysis techniques that you will learn in this semester. All right, so steps in data science. So the data science are categorized. I think there are lots of ways to categorize it, but I would like to put it like this way. So you have two parts, data engineering and also computational data science, right? So data engineering is a way that you get, is basically how you get the data and get the data ready, right? So data acquire and to prepare, right? So data acquire, that depends on the particular problem, right? So for example, if you're a geology major, you go to field and you get the data from the field, from the rocks and from the ice cores, etc. While the computational data science, that's how you analyze data and put the results together as a hypothesis or theory, right? So that's analysis, right? In this way, so I'd say, so from the data acquiring and all the way to data results report, that's programmability. So that's programmable, right? Not most of the data, preparing side. And after you get the data reports and you get the theory and you can get the decision. And when you got the decision, and we can act, right? For example, we found that there's a serious, climate crisis based on data analysis, and we need to do something to protect the environment. So something like that, right? But that's outside the scope of this class. Right, so in this course, we will mostly do data preparing and analysis, and how to get conclusions based on your analysis results. Right, so this is basically, so data science is basically a iterative step, and you usually start from building the data set, and you explore the data set, and based on analysis, we scale the data products and get conclusions and for reports, and then we act, right? So based on act, we go collect new data to verify the results or apply your results, right? So that's how data science works. And in this process, and there are lots of examples of how you can get bad data analysis or misleading results out of it. For example, there'll be faulty polling, right? So you're biased on how you're getting your results, they're cherry picked, and flawed correlations, right? You find correlation and you just use that as a causality, right? And also data fission or misleading data visualization, right? You do tricks on how you show the data to make it look like really bizarre or exaggerated. And also, selective bias and using percentage changes in combined with a small sample size. So these are things that when we preparing the data or acquiring the data, you need to, even doing processes, you need to pay attention to. And for example, rule number one, I would remind everybody. So even before you start data analysis, rule number one is correlations are not necessary causalities, right? You found some things are related, but doesn't mean that they are related physically with a meaningful, within a meaningful mechanism, right? So for example, this is interesting. Data analysis is actually, so you have two lines. So the horizontal axis is time, which is in the unit of years. And the vertical axis has two vertical axes. So the red one is US spending on science. So that's the budget money spending on science in the units of billions, right? So that's a lot of money. And the other one, the black curves, has a different vertical scale. That's the suicides, right? So hanging, strangulation, and suffocation suicides, right? That's not good. Right? So if you plot these two lines on top of each other, and you find this really nice, well, no, I wouldn't say nice, really good correlation between the two, right? So which means that when we spend more money on science and more people gets suicide, right? Does that make sense? Right? Of course, we cannot contribute the suicide rate increase of that as a function of money we spend on science. But if you do bad data analysis and you get a conclusion that we spend too much money, we spend more money we spend on science and technology, we got more people suicide. Right? So that's not a good example. That's called bad data analysis. And there's another example that we use a lot is that it's interesting it's a news from Fox News, and you can see that that's Fox News trying to say how much the Bush tax cut will happen, right? So now if you look at this picture and it says now it's 35%, and after a time then the act starts and there'll be 39%, right? So that's a huge difference between the two. Right? Is that really true? But if you look at the bar plots by doing this, and there'll be the difference is actually tiny compared to these two, right? But it's not the reason that they did this is because it's not starting from 0, it's starting from like 34, right? So the difference between these two bars, they're exaggerated, right? So trying to use this as a misleading data, type visualization for people trying to believe your things, right? So when you see a plot or you see a plot, you see a data set. So you need to, so the lesson learned here is when you see things like this and you need to learn based on your own knowledge and judgment rather than just believe whatever people tells you, right? Okay, so what you will learn in this course, right? So first of all, you will learn basic programming skills for data analysis using Python. So we'll go through NumPy and use some SciPy and Matplotlib and also Pandas. That's the data process, the data preparing and process library. And Basemap, that's how we generate maps because we are earth science students. And generating maps, that's an important technique to have. So you probably spend about 4 weeks on this. And these are all not names of the libraries, and what are libraries, I will tell you guys later. And also we will learn basic statistical skills for handling large amount of data. So like statistical analysis, correlations, even regression, fitting, data fitting, etc. And we will also learn how to perform time series analysis. We're looking at time series, kind of figure out what kind of variations are included in a time series. So that will be about 0 weeks. And we'll also spend a lot of time on making nice plots, including 1D and 2D plots. So 2D plots will be color plots, and 1D will be basically line plots, bar plots, etc. And we'll also learn how to perform basic mathematical modeling using Python. And this is actually an interesting topic that we started last year because the course was offered right in the middle of the pandemic, or we're still in the middle of the pandemic. So I did some research and found some interesting models to describe the dynamics of the pandemic, and we can use Python to model that easily. So that will be, we'll spend a few weeks on how to do modeling like that. And also, depending on the time, and we will have time to do geospatial data analysis, like putting information on maps and analyzing results. And that will be about a week or so, depending on how we progress. Right? So back to data science. So to become a data scientist, and there are skills that you need mathematics, and you need technology applications, right? So apply math to a given field, like for here will be earth sciences. And also we will have a business and strategy decisions, like you got the data analysis and you make decisions, right? So all these overlapped region, and that's where data science is, right? So for the data scientist, you need a lot of skills, right? For the soft skills, hard skills, I would say you need knowledge about machine learning nowadays, and statistics, and algebra, and business information and problem solving skills and data visualization. So these are skills that you need to master, not all of them, at least a part of them, right? To be a part of the team. And soft skills, you need to lots of things about, like passion and related problems to analytics and care about engineering solutions, curiosity, and communication with other team players. Because nowadays these projects are always collaborations between different groups, right? So does that mean data scientists are unicorns to find? That's actually not true, right? So the answer here is I would say as long as you have hard skills of one of these, and you should be able to play nicely in a team, right? So we need people with skills to form a team like that. Doesn't mean that you have to be expert of everything, but you need to learn basics of things like that. Right. So why do we choose Python for data science? Right. So there we have lots of options to use. Right. So this is a figure which is generated based on data for several years ago. So if you look at this is the time, that's the horizontal axis. Vertical axis is the percentage of matching job postings, which means that that's like 0.1% of job postings, including skills of Python or machine learning, data science, right? So you can see that after 2016, and the requirement for Python, which is this blue curve, increases enormously, right? It's overwhelming all these other languages like R or Java or C and C++, etc. Right? So that's why that's why we choose Python for this class, because the point here is that as a science student and college graduates, and you need to get some nice skills and to put on your resume when you're applying for grad schools or jobs, saying, oh, I can do this, right? So Python will be nice skills to have when you have put on the resume that, I have the skills to use Python to do all these analysis, right? So that's a nice skill to have, supposed to help you not just learning the skills, but also help you, get more ready for your next step of your career. Right. So this is also another, this is a slightly newer one. Sorry about the bad quality of the figures. I need to regenerate these myself. So this is the same thing, but it's a little bit newer. So if you look at data science job postings, and there'll be like 0.15% in all the job postings. And if you look at Python right now, it's more than R. The reason is that because I think, that's my personal opinion, that Python is more powerful or flexible in doing different things. Of course, R can do all these things as well. Python is more flexible to work as a glue between different types of models. So you can use Python to put all the models together easily. And it's really easy to use. So it's a high level language and it's really easy to use, right? So that's why we started to offer this course in our department, and that's also why we chose Python for the course. Right. So more details why we choose Python for data science. It's easy to read and learn, right? So self-learning is very straightforward. So I learned Python all by myself, because when I was an undergraduate, we learned C and C++. That's all we learned. There wasn't Python at that time, right? So when Python came up, and people saying, "Oh, this is a really nice language." So based on my computing experience, I learned Python myself based on the materials on the website. Basically, that's the documentation Python, which was relatively straightforward, and you should be able to do that. Right? This is another thing that I want to remind you guys, that college education is not professional education. So there's a difference between college education and professional degrees, right? So if you're getting a professional degree, for example, you get maybe professional certifications. For example, if you're going to a chef school, right? So you get a certificate and then you work as a chef, and you could be an expert, like super good chef, but that's all you do, right? So that's called a professional degree. While a college degree, I think the fundamental difference is that you have the skills to learn new things, right? So the skills of learning new things and solving problems, that's the main purpose of a college degree, right? So I got a college degree, although I worked in earth sciences, but I'm capable of doing other stuff because I had experience like learning things like Python, right? So that's what I think, self-learning or problem solving is important in college education, right? All right, so back to Python. So Python has a very vibrant community, which means that lots of people are using Python. And which means that when you have a problem, when you have an error message, you just Google it and you should be able to find an answer because someone else must have met this problem before, right? Because we're not alone, right? So that's why you can get lots of help from the community. And the one of the reason why it's so useful like that way is because it's growing and it evolves sets of open source libraries. So which means that the data processing, data visualization, management, software, the codes, functions, routines, they're all open source. Right? For example, people developed this and they post it online, you can use it for free. And whenever you find a problem and we fix it or someone else fix it, so you get this open source community for all these Python libraries and for the learning, right? So Python also can be applied to each step of the data science process, and we will see that later. And also one thing we will learn in this course is notebooks, right? So basically that's the skill you're going to master after this class. We can use a Python notebook to do all your analysis, data preparing, analysis, visualization, and even write a report, right? So that's why it's so powerful. Right. So before we start to talk about basics about programming, I'll just give you a sense of how to write everybody's first programming program, right? So that's called Hello World program. So if you learned computer science before, that's always the first program you will write. It's called Hello World. How does that work? You write a program to print out this sentence, Hello World, to the screen. So that's called Hello World program, right? So if we go to C, and it's fairly complicated, right? You have to include some kind of library and you define a main function which does the printing job and use the printf and with this hello world inside it and enter and done. Right? And then if you go to Java, and it's even more complicated, you have to define classes, which is public, and then you define a function, which is also called main, and with input arguments, which is a string, and then you call this function, you call library called system and function inside system out, and then print it, something like this, right? So don't worry if you don't understand C and Java, it doesn't matter, right? The point is not the details about the language, it's about the next one. So let's take a look at Python. Here we go. So if you do Python, we just do print hello world, right? So if you do this, Python will print out hello world in the screen, right? So which one is your favorite based on this, right? Of course, it's the Python one, right? That's the easiest one. So we are cutting out all these crap of Java and C. You just say, print this for me, and Python will just do that, right? So it's really straightforward, very high level. It's just like people talking, right? So Python is very powerful and it's pretty fast. Well, not depending on how you define fast, it's probably not fast enough for large scale supercomputing, but for data science, it's pretty fast. And Python plays very well with others, which means that you can use other people's codes easily in a Python program. And it basically runs everywhere on all kinds of platforms. And it's a high level, friendly, and easy to use and learn. And most importantly, it's free. Because I'm a big fan of supporting open source policy. Because when I think, especially for scientists, all these research results, software developed based on grant supports that are based on taxpayers' public resource. So it should be open source, right? But if you're running a company, that's a different story. But Python, luckily, it's open sourced, right? So this is the website. If you go to Python, www.python.org, and that's the website for Python. And then you can find all these, what's Python, downloading some information libraries and documentation and asking questions of the community and other stuff. And you can even use a calculation, or this is a place you can type in and code here as well. Right? So this is python.org is a nice place to find resources. Right. So a couple of useful websites for learning Python. So we will have python.org. So that's the Python cookbook. And anaconda.com, that's the software that we're going to use. Right? So the main task for the next lecture, lecture of today will be downloading the software and open the Jupyter Notebook and type in your first Python program. And also NumPy, which is the numerical Python library that does all these calculations, vector calculations, array calculations. And SciPy, that's scientific Python, including all these functions like special functions, etc. And also a matplotlib, that will be the main visualization library we will use. And pandas, that's the data science library, and there are more. And we will introduce some useful things, and you'll be able to find your own library does things that you want, right? Okay, so what we are going to use in this course, and we're going to use Anaconda. So that's recommended. You're welcome to use something else, but this is probably easier for beginners, I think. Right? So what you do is that you go to the www.anaconda.com, right? So this is the page we have. Maybe they update it, but there's something like this. So right, so open your browser, type in www.anaconda.com, and click the download button in the top right corner, right here, and we'll select the appropriate link for your system. And for me, it's Mac, so I choose that, right? This is Windows, that's Linux. If you use Linux, you can use this, but I suspect you guys probably don't use Linux. And once you do this, and you can download the download the Anaconda software, which is free. And it's, let's use the Python 3.7, right? Because Python 2.7 is an old version, and it should go obsolete. But there's still some like legacy codes using 2.7, but nowadays people mostly using that. So let's start with the 3.7 version, right? So once you download it, and if you go down to the page, and there's the documentation, right? So if you go to the documentation, and you can see there's Anaconda documentation tells you how to use it and how to use the navigator and what packages are included. And also there are other informations like this, but you probably don't need it for most of this course. And if something's needed, I'll tell you. Otherwise, you're welcome to look at these documentation by yourself, right? So let's do this. Let me see how much stuff we left. All right, it's about getting there. All right, so I'll just go this. So once this is installed, and we can launch the Anaconda Navigator by double-clicking the conda symbol, which is this one, right? If you double-click that, and this is what you get, what's opening down here, right? So once it's opened, and there are lots of libraries like a JupyterLab, Notebook, and Console, Spider, and etc. Right? So the Spider is also a nice environment to use, but we will use this one, which is the Jupyter Notebook. It's called Jupyter Notebook, right? So this is Jupyter Notebook, and click on the launch here, right? Once you do this, and then your browser pops up, and there's a tab opened in your browser, and for me, it's the Chrome, because I use Chrome as a default. And you open something like this, right? So you can open the create a new one, and also you can type in the codes here, right? For example, if we type in our first Python code, so you open the Jupyter Notebook and you create a new notebook, and you type in print, parenthesis, quote, hello world, bam, and quote and parenthesis, and what you get, and this is the code, and we click run, which is right here, right? You click run, and the computer will print out hello world right below the code. So this is input, this is the output, right? So that's the nice thing about the Jupyter Notebook is that you put your Python codes here and in this window on, right? And then you run it and you get the results immediately down there. And you can also use markdown cells to put in descriptions and conclusions and discussions, etc. I'll show you that later, right? So this is the main task for today to try if you can get this working, right? So this is basically what happens. That's comments. We will learn that later. And this line code starting with the print function, that's the actual codes, and what's down there is the results, right? So that's basically how the software works. And before we start, I want to remind you, which is expected in the homeworks and exercises, that comment your code as possible as you can. This is a must, right? So the comments start with a pound sign, right? So that's a pound sign, and the color change to this like light green like stuff. And comments, they're not executed by Python. So Python will ignore the comments. So comments basically you can type in anything in here. So why do we need comments? Comments are to explain what your code is doing, right? So for example, like for this Hello World program, it's easy. I know exactly. There's only one line of code. It does the print purpose, right? So when you're working in a big team or you're working a big project, it's likely that you're going to work on with hundreds of thousands of codes, even millions of lines of codes, right? So there are different blocks of codes, subroutines, functions, does all kinds of things. If you do not put in information about what this code is doing, and you might be able to manage well this week, but after a while, and your mind just not keep on track of lots of things. So you have no idea what that code is doing. And when you hand over this piece of code to your colleagues or another team member, and they have to figure out what it's doing, right? So when we have explanations, that's from the comments, and that helps everyone work smoothly, right? So comments are required for all your codes in your homeworks and exams and practices. All right. So what happens if you run the comments? Python will ignore everything. And if you happen to forget adding the pound sign here, and if you're not comment and you run it, and Python will give you a error message, right? It's called unexpected indent. And don't worry if you don't understand that. We have a special lecture on how to interpret the error messages. Right? So if you don't have the pound sign, you get an error message because Python doesn't know what to do with this line of code. Right? It will regard all these as either functional or variables that's not defined, right, in this way. Okay, so for example, this is a Python code that's from one of my colleagues. I'm not going to say who that is. And you can see that's a Python code trying to do a calculation of a vector from the Cartesian geometry to a spherical geometry. And you can see that this is a code and it looks neat, but I would say this is a very bad code, right? Why it's bad? It's very neat, right? But it looks pretty bad. Why? Because it just said, I have no idea what the heck is this thing is doing, right? Just a bunch of calculations like the dividing power, sine, cosine functions, but I have no idea what that's doing, right? Because this code lacks of comments and information, and I have no idea what these functions are doing, right? So this is a reasonable code that should look like, right? So this is basically another example, like whenever I have a definition of variables, I tell what that is. For example, the PW, that's the thermal pressure. NW, that's the density, right? And then these are the times. and this is information out. And I basically have every line, I have explanations what that line is doing, including the units and the calculations, etc. Right? So this is what your Python codes are expected to look like. And if you look at my example codes in the either in the class or in the practice files, and you will see the codes will be look like that. I basically have almost have more lines of comments than the actual codes, right? That makes it more readable and more sustainable, right? So, and another one that it's quite useful later on, we will practice that as well. So you can do the help function, right? So if you use help parenthesis, whatever function name inside it, and you should be able to, Python will tell you how to use that function, right? So you're supposed to use this print function with a value, and you can separate your print elements with space and other things, and all these default ones, and there's explanations of these. So the help function is useful when you're trying to learn a new function or your new library. And we will practice that later. And sometimes it's not that straightforward based on descriptions, and we use online search a lot, like Google. So if you don't know how to use a function or so, and you can also Google it there, and it's very likely someone else has already asked the question, and there might be examples like that. So you're encouraged to figure out, to do research, to search like this online by your own. But that's not, you're not, don't worry, I won't ask you to figure out everything on your own, right? Okay, so all right, so this is something else. So let's take a break for about 5 minutes, and we will come back to the software install.